Good afternoon and welcome once again. It's Pennsylvania Healthy Lands Week. I am your host, Amy Hill, and for today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to talk about how to be an advocate with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. So, when we talk about advocacy, advocacy is about using your voice and taking action to create change. So, this might be creating a change in your local community, might be creating a change at the state capitol or at the national capitol, but it can mean several different ways that it can take form. One way is educating others about an issue you care about, sort of signing people up to fight for your cause. Another way is persuading decision makers to support the cause. So many things happen in the halls of government that have a genuine impact in how we experience the world around us. And then thirdly is mobilizing your community to take collective action, that there is quite a lot of power in amplifying our voices together to call for change. And you don't have to be a professional lobbyist or an elected official to be an effective advocate. It's really for anybody who cares about the world around us and wants to make a difference. And why are we talking about advocacy during the Pennsylvania Healthy Lands Week? Well, advocacy is a very powerful form of stewardship. So when we're talking about stewardship of Pennsylvania's natural, cultural, and historic resources, advocacy is a perfect fit, I think, for our conversation. So welcome, Marcy Mowry, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. So tell us a little bit about who PPFF is and what role advocacy plays in your mission.
Great. Well, thank you, Amy. It's wonderful to be here. The Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation is the nonprofit partner for your state parks and state forests. We have 124 state parks in Pennsylvania, 20 forest districts, and we formed for a number of reasons. One is to engage the public in their state parks and state forests. This could be through volunteerism, this could be through advocacy, through donations. We also engage the public in supporting projects within state parks and state forests. And then we also advocate on behalf of parks, forests, and recreation, which is where I think you want to focus this conversation today. Recently, I wrote an article for the Boroughs magazine that really talked about that advocacy can be as simple as showing up. When we're talking about our state parks and state forests, we use the number that, our parks alone have over 42 million visitors a year. That speaks volumes to people's passion for these places. And we can extrapolate not just the value, but there are economic values related to people visiting and spending that all are very powerful tools when we talk about the important role parks and forests have in our health, our economy, our communities, our quality of life, and in our legacy here as Pennsylvanians.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing to say. Like, people might not think, oh, I'm going to take the family to the state park and really enjoy what it has to offer, but just showing up and vote with your feet, right? Vote with your eyeballs,
Yes.
vote with your picnic. That counts for a lot.
It really does. And not only does it count as you're being counted as a number, but it might spark your passion. We put time into things that we care about. And if we go to a park or a forest and we see something, or we know there's a threat to a park or a forest, or it could be our museum, it could be our library, it could be any of these places that we visit in our landscapes. And we see this threat, then, we're motivated to take an action. So I think just by showing up with your feet and being counted is important, but also spurring your passion, connecting other people to your passion. All of that is that process of enjoying what it is that is available to you, but is also an action of advocacy.
One of the things that comes to mind when I visit state parks, and I try to get to some of the state parks that are, within an hour's drive of me as often as they can, is not taking it for granted that there are public policy decisions that somewhere in its history decided that these acres here, this spot on, in the Pennsylvania landscape is going to be designated as a state park. And, so there are decisions that go into opening that and preserving that land and staffing it with rangers and other support staff and others, and those things to make that beautiful space, that recreation, that, vistas to look out upon, make those things available. So it is important to pause, I think, to think about the fact that some government officials had to play a role in deciding whether or not that would be a state park.
Yeah, when the foundation was first formed, advocacy was not a big part of what we did, and it became very apparent to us early on that no matter how much money we can raise in a year, if the Commonwealth wasn't investing in state parks and state forest, our work was going to have minimal impact. And so one of the big things that we advocate for is investing in state parks and state forests, as well as investing additional funds in maintenance and infrastructure. Some of the maintenance are things that just, like your house have worn, over time. Sometimes we need to invest because there have been changes in safety standards or health standards. And sometimes we need to invest because how people are recreating has changed and technologies have changed. But it's currently around 1.4 billion dollar need for these infrastructure investments. But then there's the operational expenses of running a state park and a state forest system. So advocating for the budget, and I see Pam brought up Protect Our Parks and Forests. This is a separate website that we have that just focuses on the infrastructure of our parks and forests. Some of it is that built infrastructure that you might see, think playgrounds, picnic tables, but there's also hidden infrastructure, water treatment plants, sewage treatment facilities. Then there's the natural resources of that place, which could be the trees, which, you've probably all witnessed, the death of the ash tree. What happens? How do you manage for that natural infrastructure? And then there are the cultural assets. So this was a campaign that we launched just to educate people on why we need to invest in our state parks and state forests. But then there's other pieces of legislation that could impact park or forest or your recreational opportunities. And we track that, and my magic helper behind the scenes here will bring that up. We track legislative pieces that are being introduced through what's called Soft Edge. It's a software. So we monitor legislation, and if we think it could have a positive or negative or neutral impact on parks, forests, or recreation, we follow it, we comment on it, we try to educate the public and decision makers on it as well. Like right now, one of our concerns is the potential conflict with all the additional Sunday hunting. So we really want to make sure that conflict is minimized, particularly in state parks where recreation is a little bit more dense. So Pam is showing Soft Edge. This is amazing software that we utilize where it makes it easy for a person to be an advocate. If there's action that is happening, we send out an action alert, and it quickly, if somebody visits this website, and let's say, Amy, you went to this website, you filled in your name and your address, it would populate with who your state and local, your state senator and your representative is, and gives you potential text for a letter, weighing in on a particular issue. What's really cool on the back end of this is we can see where people took action. So if we know we need to influence a particular or educate a particular elected official, we can target our messaging. So it's really cool software that allows people to quickly and easily send a message on an issue to their state elected official. This doesn't communicate at the federal level.
Well, I think I was going to say, that's an excellent tool. It's sort of takes all of the, sort of homework that you would have to do to figure out exactly who your state rep is and what their email address might be, or, how do I put my thoughts together about a particular issue. So a tool like that can hit all of those points of advocacy. It's an element of education. It directly targets decision makers, and it also makes it easy to be one of many amplifying that I know, having been doing this kind of work for many decades, that lawmakers do pay attention to these messages. Sometimes it's a question of numbers. Even, they always talk about the squeaky wheel gets grease. So lots of messages that are in favor of something or against something else. Sometimes there's a staff person who will count, and they'll say, okay, we've got 200 people who support this, who come from our district, and only 20 people who don't, so sometimes it can be that. But other times I think it's important to recognize is making something local. They say all politics is local, right? So
Right.
you are a constituent, so you care about an issue that's happening. So a lawmaker might have some sense of what the issue is from a statewide basis, but you can make it real. And you can say, as your constituent, it's going to affect me and my neighbors, the people who vote for you, in this particular way. So it can be really meaningful. Those local connections are the most powerful influencers, far more powerful than professional lobbyists and what they might say hired gun.
Absolutely. We can go in as the foundation, as a statewide organization, but we are the foundation. But when you, as a constituent, you as a user, you as an enthusiast, you as somebody who has a concern, speak to your elected official, that has much more power. And sometimes people feel like, oh, I don't know enough on the issue. Well, it's really about your passion and how it's personally going to impact you. Think about clean air. I think you and I, Amy, talked about this recently. You had shared that you have asthma, so clean air has an impact on you. So you could talk about things that are impacting clean air from the personal perspective of, this is what happens to me when the air isn't clean. So, don't fear that you don't know enough. You do know enough about yourself and what you like and what you dislike and what your concerns are, and that's really the
Right.
crux of it.
Yeah. And I think lawmakers, it can be hard to understand sometimes when you read sort of the rhetoric. There's a lot of conflict that seems to be going on, all of those types of things. But despite all of that, elected officials, no matter who they are genuinely interested in serving their constituents. They want to know how these issues impact you. There are so many issues that come before every single elected official that they don't necessarily have an opinion one way or another on every single thing. So if a few motivated constituents can reach out to them and make the case, if you will, about how important it is for the community that you share, sometimes that's enough to get a yes vote. Sometimes that's enough to turn somebody into a champion for the cause. And so I read a statistic some time ago where it was something very simple, like 5 visits and 20 phone calls or something like that can absolutely turn a disinterested elected official into a champion for a cause, that they really feel like a critical mass of their constituents really care about an issue. And I think that's really important.
I think you touch on another thing, is that elected officials have to know about a lot of different topics. So it's hard to be an expert on every topic. But if there's enough communication, it might increase the potential for them to dig deeper on a topic, to know it a little bit better. You think about, all the things that they have to deal with on a daily basis, all the potential bills, the budget, all those different topics. So you're paying them, you're doing a service by contacting them, saying, hey, this is important, dig deeper. And I would also, encourage people to know your sources of information, because as you mentioned, sometimes there's conflicting information. So know your sources and check your facts, and know that the groups that you're, the locations where you're getting your information are fact-based and not necessarily functioning on rhetoric.
Yeah, that sort of media literacy is a really important skill to acquire, is checking your sources about those different things. And now sometimes it's helpful if there is some kind of debate going on around an issue, to learn a little bit more about what perhaps a different opinion or an opposing opinion might have to say. That as an advocate, you want to understand what you're up against, but also maybe there's some arguments that you can enlighten somebody about why your point of view is something that they should consider versus something else. But another thing that I wanted to bring up, you and I had this conversation as part of our special podcast episode for Pennsylvania Healthy Lands Week, but advocacy at the local level, to the hyper local level, that in Pennsylvania, everybody lives in a township or a city or a borough, as well as a county or a school district. Even these are all elected officials that care about what you have to say. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit in the broader sense. Um,
Yeah, sorry, we have calls coming in, so I'm sorry if you hear that in the background. Well, a couple things popped into my head, Amy. One is that we're talking about advocacy, and we talked about showing up. We talked about writing elected officials, but you know, letters to the editor, petition signing. There are a lot of different ways that you can get involved on an issue. But, Pennsylvania is a series of municipal governments, local governments, and, a lot of action begins at home. A lot of us are engaged in our local communities. So you can weigh in, you can attend zoning meetings, you can attend, if you live in a borough, the borough meetings, you can attend the different meetings, municipal meetings, learn more, weigh in with your opinion, join committees, environmental environmental action committees, so that's what they call it, EACs, that used to be very popular. I don't know if they're still happening. You get involved in your local rec committee. There are also different organizations representing things that are important to you that you could join, which is another way to be active, to learn more, to connect with people with shared interest, and to be an advocate or a champion for a cause that's near and dear to your heart. It might not even be environmental, it might be health, but it might be the library, it might be the school. But, advocacy skills cut across all issues.
yeah, for sure. And advocacy isn't necessarily trying to change government policy. It could be just trying to change the behavior of people in your community. I have learned some things about leave no trace principles, and signing up and attending a workshop to learn about leave no trace, and teaching friends who might not realize that throwing orange peels on the ground in the forest floor in Pennsylvania is littering, is a form of littering. So advocating for our world around us in protecting things like that. It can be as simple as leading by example as
Role
well, can be a
modeling.
form of advocacy.
Yep.
I think another thing that goes, perhaps people don't think of it this way, is the engagement that you do, say, on social media, or the soccer sidelines, or the coffee and donuts after church, the things that you talk about, the passion that you share, kind of builds up that sort of critical interest in things. And the more people are buzzing about something, can get the attention. So if there is an issue, contacting your legislator is a very direct and important way of advocacy, but talking to other people about the issue, building up the buzz in the community is definitely a way that you can affect change. That everything really boils down to community, and how do we want to live together, and how do people know what's going on. We talked about not taking for granted that the state parks and the state forests are going to be these accessible, these beautiful places, that the restrooms are going to work, that the roads are going to be safe, that the trails are going to be marked. All of those types of things require support. And so some of it, we've talked a lot during Healthy Lands Week about volunteering and rolling up your own sleeves to help with this type of thing. But also, I think there's a genuine public-private partnership that goes into keeping those spaces public lands.
And I think it's really important too to mention that some of our most effective advocacy is education, taking people out and showing them what we're talking about.
Mm.
Whether that be board members, friends groups, volunteers, colleagues, or elected official, is actually taking them and showing them and taking that pause to have that conversation about the
Mm-hmm.
concern, and here's this from a different perspective, and think about it. Like, have you ever driven home from work and you're sitting at a stoplight and you look over and you think, I never noticed that house before. I've been driving this route
Mm-hmm.
for 10 years, but I never noticed that before. Well, we all do it. We don't notice things around us. So if you can take the time to show somebody,
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge piece of education and engagement.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it even just starting there, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to get in anybody's face about signing on to your issue or whatever. But, the first step to advocacy, I think, is understanding and knowing what it is they're talking about. Like, and this could be something you could do as well with your elected officials. If you are brave enough to set up a meeting or do a phone call or something, talk about why you care about these types of issues and introduce them to it. I know there are every state lawmaker has got to know about the state parks in their community, and they have an opinion about it. And so helping it to be a positive opinion, helping them understand what's at stake when they are making decisions at the state capitol can be really important.
Well, and I don't know anybody that likes to have somebody in your face,
Mm-hmm.
So I think education and communication is key no matter what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Is approaching it with, how can we keep thinking of Stephen Covey, how can we create a win-win scenario here?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. I think one of the other things that's important for advocacy is not everybody understands, like, Pennsylvania is still debating how their state budget is going to look. It's causing issues all over the place. But not everybody understands what is at stake. And so again, not taking for granted that state park, but, going there and seeing for yourself, noting the rangers and what they're doing and where they are, and that the visitor center is open on a given day, and that the bathrooms are clean, and those types of things. Somebody pays for that. So educating yourself a little bit about the impact of those policies, the what happens if it goes away, what happens if we increase the funding, or what happens if we change the rules and regulations about who can take those jobs, or how do you protect the public and certain building codes and things like that. That it's not something everybody thinks about every day, but it does definitely have an impact on your experience with those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think as we start to wrap up here a little bit, maybe we could recap some of the things that individuals can do to advocate for Pennsylvania's healthy lands. Like, what does advocacy as a stewardship look like?
I think showing up to the things that are important to you, which means that you're being counted. Not only are you being counted, but you're building your own enthusiasm and your own education by being there. And again, this could be a museum, this could be a library, this could be a local park, a state park. It could be another issue that's near and dear to your heart. But taking others and including them in your experiences so that they too can learn and become passionate. Writing letters, joining organizations, making financial contributions to organizations, being a steward in your everyday actions
Mhm.
is important. There are things that you can do, like your example of leave no trace. Um, you could sign petitions. You could write a letter when you're asked by a group that you're involved in, or write a letter on your own, or contact your local or your state elected or federally elected official on issues that are important to you. Writing letters. So there's a
Mhm.
the continuum is there, and I think we're always as individuals moving around on that continuum with our level of
Mhm.
involvement. But your engagement, your participation is critical to protecting the things that are near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing: register to vote.
Yeah, well, yeah, that helps
You
too.
know, that
Or run
it's
for office.
yeah, well, that would be, that's a really bold move to do that. But
Yes.
keeping in mind that all of these things genuinely have an impact in how public policy plays out in our local communities, in our state, and in our nation. I think those are all really important things. And I appreciate these conversations so much. I find it amazing to have witnessed personally over the years how movements of motivated people have banded together. They have amplified their voices into a loud call to action and have achieved significant change, especially here in the state capital. That's where most of my experience lies. And so I think we've been saying all this week about how many hands make healthy lands. I think many voices have a powerful impact as well. So many hands, many voices make healthy lands.
And I think it's important too is to ask questions.
Mm.
Ask questions
Mhm.
for clarification, because not only could it help you better understand, but it might help somebody who's in a decision making arena think through something differently.
Yeah.
So ask questions.
Hmm. This is all very important things. Well, Marcy, I appreciate so much your support and your expertise on this issue. We will share the link to where people can take action through the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Advocacy Network. And thank you for tuning in for another episode, if you will, of Pennsylvania Healthy Lands Week Lunch and Learn. We have another program scheduled for tomorrow, so pay attention for that. And
And what is
again,
tomorrow's topic, Amy? What
tomorrow's
is tomorrow?
topic, we'll be speaking with some experts from Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful and talking about their efforts to do a coastal cleanup on Lake Erie, and some very interesting results of volunteers showing up and picking up litter and making the beach and the lake a better place. So good stuff to come tomorrow.
Awesome.
So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thank you.